Okay, hello everyone. Welcome back. This is for section 5.4 about absolute rulers of Russia, and this is to help you fill in your guided reading for this section. So the way that this section is set up is we have a series of problems that were present in Russia at this time, and then as we go through and talk about the problems, we'll also describe the solutions, mostly that Peter the Great came up with for each set of problems. So the first problem is Russian people did not believe that change was necessary. Russia had been cut off from Western Europe for quite some time, going back to the Eastern Roman Empire when the Byzantines kind of influenced Russia and their religion. Then the Mongols had taken over a large part of Russia, and they weren't really interacting with Western Europe for very long. And in fact, they thought the Western Europeans were not a good thing, that they were evil or that they were heretics, because they practiced different religion and had different practices. Even Peter said that the only way to get the Russian people to change was to force them to do it. And so Peter knew this, and as a result, he wanted to increase his power as an absolute ruler and to be able to force the people to change in this way. Okay, the second problem is that the Russian Orthodox Church was too strong. Now, we mentioned in class before that there's several branches of Christianity, and once you get towards Eastern Europe, you start to see that many of these cultures practice what's called the Eastern Orthodox religion, Eastern Orthodox Christianity. And in Russia, the Eastern Orthodox Church that was there had a lot of power in the society. Peter knew that this was a problem in terms of him being able to rule with absolute power. So his solution was a couple things. First, he brought the Russian Orthodox Church under state control. That means it now was responsible to reply to the government. That was his boss. In other words, Peter was his boss. He abolished what was called the patriarch position. Now, this position was the head of the Russian church, and Peter took it away so that he would be able to rule more over it instead of having the leader of the church rule. And finally, he created what's called the Holy Synod. And this was a group of people that actually ran the church, but they were responsible directly to Peter. He gave the direction of how they should conduct the church, of what should be done. So by these three steps, Peter brought the Russian Orthodox Church under his control. Okay, so the third problem that we're going to talk about is how the great landowners of Russia had too much power. Now, you remember from your reading that the title for these landowners were called boyars. These were the landowning nobles in Russia. So just like we've seen from a few other examples of absolute monarchs, in order to strengthen their power, they need to take it from their nobles, or in this case, the Russian Tsar had to take it from his boyars. So Peter came up with a couple solutions. First of all, he recruited men from lower-ranking families, and he promoted them and gave them land. So in doing this, these men that suddenly got these promotions and these titles, they now would have loyalty to Peter. They would follow his rulings, they would listen to him, they would respect him because he was a source of their power and their wealth. Okay, so in other words, Peter lowered the power of the boyars by recruiting new lower-ranking nobles and giving them power so that they were loyal to him. Okay, number 4, the problem here is that the Russian army was untrained and its tactics and weapons were outdated. Peter knew that in order to be a strong ruler, in order for Russia to be a strong kingdom, he needed a stronger, more modern army. So this is some of the things that he did. First, he brought in European officers. So in other words, Western European people, soldiers, officers, high-ranking officials who had experience, who knew how to run an army. They came in, they were kind of like consultants. They were there to give pointers and to help the Russian army. And they did a couple things. First, they drilled and trained his men. So they made his soldiers stronger, more efficient, better fighters. They also introduced modern weapons so that the Russian army had more modern weapons. They would be able to compete with other armies or fight against other armies in case of a war. Another thing that he did was increase his army to 200,000 soldiers. Russia is a very massive amount of land, and a lot of people live there. And so they're able to raise a very large army. The Russian army at this time was one of the biggest in Europe. Okay, problem number 5. Russian society had to change to compete with modern states of Europe. As we said, Russia was kind of isolated. They weren't nearly as up-to-date in technology. As we saw, their army was behind. They were behind in a lot of ways, and Peter felt that a couple things. One, Russia is a great place and that it should be able to compete with these other countries. Two, if Russia continued to fall behind and the other modern states of Europe continued to improve in technology and war tactics and so on, Russia would be threatened by these other countries. And so he felt that he had to modernize his country. So for this solution, there's 5 things that I chose from the book that I want you to know. Please write small in your space so you can fit all of them. So he made a lot of reforms. First of all, he brought in potatoes. And as you guys remember from learning in the previous chapter during the Columbian Exchange, potatoes didn't exist in Europe till they were brought over from the Americas. And potatoes were very important because they were a nutritious food, and this became a staple of the Russian diet. A staple meaning they ate it at almost every meal. They're easy to grow, they're high in nutrition. Potatoes helped increase the nutrition of your average Russian. Secondly, he started a newspaper. Peter understood that in order for his society to be informed and understand what was happening, there needed to be methods of communication. And he actually edited the first issue of that newspaper. It was the first Russian newspaper that had ever come out. Number 3, he allowed women to attend social gatherings. Women had a fairly low status in Russia at this time, and Peter thought that in order to modernize his country, he needed to allow women to become more a part of society. Number 4, he also forced nobles to wear Western fashion. They no longer could wear the traditional Russian clothes. He wanted them to dress and look more like Westerners. And another step that he took was he actually forced the Russians to shave, Russian nobles in particular, to shave their beards, because at that time the Western Europeans weren't really wearing beards. Finally, he opened several different types of schools. Schools that specialized in arts, in sciences, and particularly about navigation. Peter was really big on being able to use the sea and navigating to other parts of the world by ship. Okay, problem number 6. To promote education and growth, Russia needed a seaport for travel to the west. So Peter saw this as a major problem. Russia had one seaport prior to this time period. It's called Archangel, and there was a lot of ice. It was very far north, and for large parts of the year there was a lot of ice, which made it impossible to navigate out to the sea from the port. So Peter felt that the key to modernizing Russia was having access to a warm water port. So Peter's solution was thus: he decided that he needed to gain territory that had access to a warm water port, and so he started to fight against the Swedes. And he was trying to gain land that they possessed to win access to the Baltic Sea. And eventually he succeeded. And if you take a look at this map, you can see the purple is territory added by Peter to the Russian Empire. And you can also take a look and see how, if you look closely, you can see that just west of St. Petersburg, that purple land, it borders right onto the Baltic Sea. And so that's the land that Peter wanted, and he eventually gained during his rule. Okay, problem number 7 is about that Peter needs a port city. Now he has this land, but there's not really any cities or settlements built upon it. And so Peter forces thousands of serfs. Remember, serfs are the Russian peasants, and they go to work to build the city out in this area that hasn't been built on before. Many of these serfs died because of poor conditions. The area where Peter wanted to build a city was very swampy and marshy, and many people died from bad conditions and diseases during this time period. However, Peter, being an absolute ruler, forced them to do it anyway, and made the city that is now modern-day St. Petersburg. And that leads us to the next and the final problem, actually. The new city called St. Petersburg needed to be settled. He's building it, but nobody lives there yet. And so the solution that Peter comes up with is that he's going to order and force many of the nobles, or otherwise remember known as the boyars, to leave Moscow to live in St. Petersburg. And in this way, he's going to build up a large city. It's going to be kind of built from scratch, and over time, the Russian monarchs built a very beautiful city. Most people would argue that St. Petersburg is the most beautiful city in Russia. And a lot of that is due to Peter the Great not only building the city, but then ordering and forcing his nobles to leave Moscow to go live there. Okay, thanks a lot, guys. I will see you tomorrow.